Imagine a civilization just collapsing, not from tanks or missiles, but dissolving from within.
Succumbing to a wave, a moral and demographic wave that it was completely unprepared for.
Or maybe unwilling to stop. That deeply unsettling and frankly inflammatory scenario is the core of Jean Raspail's The Camp of the Saints.
A book that's become, well, both infamous and hugely influential in certain political circles since it came out in 1973.
And we're really excited to offer this new comprehensive look, discover a new in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary.
Unlike our previous review, which was a more focused analysis, this is a full overview.
We're tracing the intellectual roots, the key arguments, and the real-world impact. If you find this expanded format helpful, please let us know. Your feedback really will help shape what we do next.
So today, we're diving into The Camp of the Saints, or Le Camp des Saints. It's shelved as dystopian fiction, but its purpose is, well, clearly polemical.
It's an argument.
Exactly. It paints this grim picture of Western civilization's collapse, driven by what the author sees as a psychological failure to resist mass immigration from the Third World.
So it's less about logistics and more an indictment of self-doubt.
That's the core of it.
And as we navigate this very complex, often volatile material, remember, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
Okay, let's get into that central scenario because it is designed to shock.
It is. Raspail starts with this unbelievable, almost mythical plot, an enormous armada, something like 1 million impoverished people, setting sail from the Ganges region in India.
And their destination is the southern coast of France, a promised land.
It's an apocalyptic vision right from page 1.
It is, but what's so telling is where Raspail focuses the narrative. You'd think it would be about the journey, that harrowing voyage.
But it's not.
No. The real tension is in the reaction, or the calculated non-reaction of the French and other Western elites, the politicians, the media, the church.
And how are they portrayed?
As morally disarmed, paralyzed, or, in some cases, secretly welcoming the whole thing as a kind of moral cleansing for a decadent West.
That explains the style, then. It's not a character-driven story at all.
Not in the slightest.
It feels more like an angry thesis, just sort of disguised as a novel.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's an omniscient, essay-like narrative full of a heavy authorial commentary. He isn't asking you to sympathize with a character.
No, he's trying to hammer home an ideological point.
Precisely. And the characters are just caricatures for his ideas. The bleeding heart priest, the weak politician, the cynical journalist, the doomed traditionalist.
And the imagery is sensational, not subtle.
Not at all. It's meant to create a visceral shock, not psychological depth. It's essentially agit-prop fiction.
We also need to place this in its 1973 context.
Oh, absolutely. The Cold War is the backdrop. Tensions between the Soviets and China and Siberia, unrest in South Africa.
Why is that specific setting so important for his argument?
Because Raspail is arguing that the West, despite being so affluent, was spiritually hollow.
So it was already weakened from within.
Yes, obsessed with media spectacle and humanitarian rhetoric, but with no real will to survive. The external military threats of the Cold War are nothing, he implies, compared to the internal corrosion of self-doubt and guilt.
The collapse is entirely self-inflicted.
That's the thesis.
Okay, so let's go to the beginning. Calcutta. How does this whole apocalyptic voyage even start?
Right, the catalyst. It's not some grand conspiracy. It begins with a deeply flawed charity policy.
The charity policy.
Yes. Western aid workers and Catholic priests have been promoting the adoption of Indian children by Belgian families. The book states about 40,000 children were resettled over 5 years.
But then it stops.
It stops abruptly. The authorities realized the sheer unmanageable scale of the migration it was creating.
And cutting off that hope creates the crisis.
It does. A desperate, hungry crowd storms the Belgian consulate. And this is where the book introduces its most notorious symbolic figure.
The one critics always point to because the language is so deliberately derogatory.
Yes. A destitute scavenger, carrying his deformed child, pleading for passage. The book refers to him with language designed to shock and dehumanize.
And we have to pause here because when Raspail uses a term like the turd eater,
it's not just descriptive. It is a calculated rhetorical tool. The author is choosing the most shocking, dehumanizing image possible to represent the entire migrant mass.
He wants the reader to associate the movement not with individuals, but with something else entirely.
With an irresistible, terrifying, and fundamentally unclean wave. understanding that choice of language is crucial to understanding the book's political intent.
And this shocking encounter works. A Belgian consular employee, completely overwhelmed, basically throws in his lot with them.
He does. He helps redirect this enormous crowd to a nearby port where hundreds of old, abandoned ships are just sitting there.
Many of them former colonial fleet vessels.
The symbolism is heavy, isn't it? These old ships of European colonial power are now being used to carry the masses back to the colonizer.
And the conditions are described as just miserable.
Overcrowding, filth, disease. It's presented as this single, overwhelming human tide, the armada of the last chance, pushing west.
And as it moves, the West's reaction becomes the entire story.
The media becomes obsessed.
Yeah.
Television, newspapers, radio, they track the ships minute by minute. It becomes a constant anxiety-inducing spectacle.
And the framing is always dual, right? Either they're sympathetic victims needing rescue,
Or they're a terrifying demographic tidal wave that will destroy everything.
This media spectacle drives the book's main theme, Western paralysis.
Absolutely. Governments debate military intervention as the armada nears places like Egypt or South Africa. And the military leaders, they are consistently shown as capable and willing to act.
So why don't they? If it's presented as an existential threat, why the hesitation?
It's fear. Fear of the moral and political consequences. The constant worry about being labeled racist or inhumane by the media.
Proves to be a more effective defense for the migrants than any warship.
In Raspail's world, yes. The West has lost the moral backbone for self-preservation. It's paralyzed by its own guilt.
And this isn't just happening on the ocean. Raspail shows this collapse happening everywhere at once.
He does. He creates these parallel crises to amplify the sense of a total collapse of Western dominance.
Like in Siberia.
Right. Soviet troops, the supposed hardliners, are shown hesitating to stop huge masses of Chinese peasants crossing the border.
And in South Africa.
Black migrants gather at the Limpopo River, ready to overwhelm what he frames as the last bastion of white rule there.
Then there's the symbolic collapse in Britain.
Yes. In London, a non-European Commonwealth Committee takes control and arranges a royal marriage to a Pakistani spouse. It's all meant to show that this is a global, coordinated event.
And the focus then shifts back to Paris, to the intellectual heart of France.
Where the elites are reacting, and any talk of resistance, even just defense, is immediately condemned as racist.
In fact, they celebrate it.
They do. Influential left-wing figures and church leaders actively celebrate the arrivals, calling them a million Christs, or the purifying future of humanity.
This internal breakdown, where the guardians of the culture are rooting for its replacement, is central to his argument.
It is. The situation in Paris grows incredibly complex, and it raises these huge questions about national identity. And this is probably a good moment to pause and mention that this kind of detailed analysis is brought to you by Mindful Moments.
That's our YouTube channel. We offer AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques.
All to inspire reflection and rational thought. We think it's especially valuable for aspiring authors, helping you connect the dots on dense material like this.
So back in France, this internal debate leads to the ultimate government failure, and it all centers on the president.
Right. He initially plans to be firm. He's going to deploy troops, maybe even sink the ships as a show of force.
But he breaks.
During his final national address, he has a complete psychological breakdown. Instead of a clear order, he just retreats. He tells the soldiers to follow their consciences.
Which is the worst possible thing he could say.
It instantly destroys any chance of a unified defense. The crisis just accelerates exponentially.
And the fallout is immediate.
Devastating. Military units desert. They're unwilling to face the consequences of firing on the masses. Civilians in the South see the government's paralysis, and they just flee north in a panic.
Clogging the roads, leaving towns and villages completely undefended.
And that's when internal disorder takes over. We see it in characters like the radical youth leader, Panama Ranger.
His followers just engage in looting and opportunism.
Exactly. Raspail uses them to show that French society was already terminally ill. The nihilism was already there before the Armada even arrived.
And then the moment comes. The Armada makes landfall on the Mediterranean coast.
Against only minimal, scattered resistance, the book just depicts total chaos. Looting, traffic jams, a complete loss of control.
And symbolically, the entire southern half of France is just lost, overrun.
The civilization fails its stress test.
Yeah.
And as the story moves to its final confrontations, the focus shifts entirely to the last holdouts.
The very few who choose to stay and fight.
And they're all highly symbolic figures. First, there's Count Calges.
The aristocrat. He represents the old, cultivated France that Raspail feels is being erased.
He stays in his ancestral home, refusing to flee, turning it into a rallying point.
And he's joined by a military man.
Colonel Dragesses. He commands this tiny, isolated garrison. We're talking a very small number, about number 19 men who gather in a village.
Preparing for a symbolic, probably futile final stand.
The last bastion of Free France, as they call it. The last of the will to resist.
But there's a fascinating detail here, a character who complicates things a little.
Monsieur Hamadura.
A westernized Indian from Pondicherry. He despises the approaching masses and joins the defenders.
And he insists vehemently that being a white is a matter of mentality, of upholding certain cultural values, not just skin color.
His presence frames the struggle as cultural, not purely racial, though the author's terms are obviously heavily weighted.
They are. And it's important to say, while the book builds dramatically to what happens to these characters, we're stopping short of detailing those final outcomes. This is a spoiler-free summary.
So to wrap this up, the book is a powerful, if intensely polemical and often offensive exploration of societal fears.
Fears that clearly still resonate decades later. The core themes are stark. Mass immigration, demographic anxiety, what's often framed now as the Great Replacement Theory.
The perceived fragility of Western culture, and that debate between humanitarianism and national self-preservation.
It was designed to polarize. Its reception in 1973 was modest, but it gained huge notoriety later.
Especially in the 2000s and 2010s, as global migration debates really intensified.
And that's where its legacy is so complex. An organization like the Southern Poverty Law Center calls it a racist white supremacist fantasy, pointing to its dehumanizing language.
But on the other hand, it's cited by anti-immigration activists worldwide as a prophetic warning.
They use its fictional collapse as a roadmap for current events.
Which leads to a final thought.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, given the book's controversial and extremist framing, what does its enduring influence, decades after publication, suggest about the societal anxieties and rhetorical tools used in global debates about borders and identity today?
A powerful thought to leave you with. Thank you for diving into this incredibly dense and challenging book with us.
It shows the power of a single shocking narrative to frame a debate for generations.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique, subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally. See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.